This week in Agriculture Science 465, we focused on intercultural competency and the Wind River water governance issue.
I just want to review this developmental plan that Bennett and other people, his colleagues, developed in the early 2000s. Jason, welcome. I could say Ibi Singala and Bambra. Did you have a chance to read them?
I read as much as I could read, of course.
Okay. In his developmental plan, or developmental explanation of the model of how one moves in their lifetime from one stage to another, what's the very beginning?
The very beginning is denial.
Denial, right. Well, I'm sure you've all experienced newborn babies. I've had a lot of them. I guess I've had 8, but they come into the world pretty much in that phase. The world revolves around them, and you better pay attention.
Defense.
Defense, yeah. And what happens in defense?
You kind of see your cultural worldview as the only viable one, and I guess you're more defensive as to like saying why yours is the best, or your view of why your culture is the best.
That's right. Then after defense comes?
Minimization.
Okay. And how would you define minimization?
Sort of breaking down signifiers of each group that might be meaningful in order to sort of forge commonalities that are not necessarily there in a way.
So, and in acceptance, what is acceptance like? What does that feel like or appear like?
You're more acceptant of another culture than being equal, basically. And adaptation is when you actually start to learn aspects of a different culture and adapt it into the way that you would interact with a person from a different culture.
My understanding of this is that integration is, it's not the next step, it's just something that happens.
A person experiences other cultures like as if it were their own, like they move in and out of different cultures in a way.
Yeah, they move in and out.
I kind of see it more like the ability to have engaged and meaningful dialogues that acknowledge both groups' complexities and like to be able to, incorporate aspects of both to further a common goal.
So we're looking at the state of Wyoming here. Kind of looks like this. In 1863, the Shoshone Reservation was 44 million acres, and it basically looked like something like this. It took up parts of northern Colorado, Utah, Idaho, Bozeman, all of Yellowstone, and where we are now. 5 years later, in 1868, the reservation was reduced to something like this. It went from 44 million acres in 1863 to 2 million acres in 1868. Okay, the reservation that was this size in 1868 was originally just the Shoshone Reservation. The state of Wyoming came into existence in 1890. Okay, so there were a series of reductions to the reservation. So we're looking at this here now, where the reservation is like this. It's the same size as Yellowstone, at 2.2 million acres actually. The Shoshone and Arapaho tribes are the very first tribe before any state, 30 years before the Wilderness Act, to set aside a wilderness roadless area. This is 108,000 acres and it has several hundred miles of rivers and streams. World-class fisheries. This drains down into the Wind River drainage, which is the largest watershed in Wyoming. Of course, kind of drains like this is the Wind River. It comes like this and it leaves the reservation. As the Wind River leaves the reservation here, it changes from the Wind River to the Bighorn. And the Bighorn River that flows in Montana is the Wind River. A lot of people don't know that. In 1887, the federal government established the General Allotment Act, which opened up reservations to homesteading. They basically didn't like how Indians were living communally. They said, we want to give each of you guys 160 acres. Each individual is going to be given 160 acres of tribal land, and after 20 years, if you utilize that efficiently, we'll give you title. Okay, well, we've got hunters and gatherers that have lived here for 10,000 plus years who've subsisted on the fisheries and the wildlife, the buffalo, the elk, deer, and fish. The federal agency said, okay, well, did you use it efficiently when individuals claim their title? And by efficiently, they meant did you farm and ranch it? Well, how can you tell a person who's been living for thousands of years off the land to suddenly become farmers and ranchers? They said, no, you didn't use it efficiently, and so they took that title and they advertised in the east and sold it for pennies per acre. And that created a checkerboard effect on reservations in the west where non-Indian landowners were given these chunks and parcels of land to occupy because tribes didn't use them efficiently. So there was an area created in the reservation called the Riverton Reclamation Project that set aside 394,000 acres for white agricultural development. So the Bureau of Reclamation came in and they built a dam called the Diversion Dam, and we're going to watch it in the video, where they divert the Wind River and the waters that feed the Wind River to divert most of the water to these farmers and ranchers. This depletes a 55-mile stretch of river, whereas above the dam we have world-class fisheries. And so this is what really creates the conflict. It's that we don't allow water to remain in the system to maintain the fisheries, which are vitally important to the tribes of the reservation. And then the wastewater ditches come back into the river over here, and on goes the Wind River to the boundary, and then to the Bighorn, and then into users into Montana. And so that's a real quick overview of what happens to the water at Wind River. That's what the conflict does in the paper, and in the video we're about to see. It's going to really bring to light what that issue is between players, non-Indian and Indian, on the reservation.
How might Bennett then be useful to the participants in this Wind River water governance issue?
A lot of it has to do with engaging the cultural capital, right? Like engaging our regions and our cultures, understanding and relationships with water.
Is this an intercultural competency issue? Does Bennett have anything to say about this issue? I mean, would any of this help out?
And what would be some tools then?
I guess in their case, like a lawyer, because I mean, it seems like a lot of it's very political, and with that sort of thing, someone that would have the knowledge of how the system works, the system that is needed to, the system that deals with who owns the rights and who doesn't.
After dinner, the class split up into breakout groups to discuss the water rights issue on the Wind River.
The dam is right here, and this pretty much the whole area is a Riverton Reclamation Project, all non-Indians. This stretch of river right here all the way to Riverton is
So, and then the third diversion flows back towards Shoshone, though, right? We're not seeing that on the map.
Well, we don't see any of the diversions. I'm just kind of pointing out where they would be. The diversion dam is the first diversion, and that's managed by Midvale. The second division is managed by Leclerc, and then the third diversion is managed by Riverton Valley. Those three irrigation management districts manage the head gates on those three diversions. This is 5 Mile Creek. It's not really a creek. It's more like a drainage, but that's where they dump their wastewater. It goes into 5 Mile Creek. And at the same time this water is dry, this drainage is running up over 500,000 acre feet. The amount of water that the tribes wanted to remain in the system, which just justifies that they're taking it out of spite. They're taking it to show in their data books that they're actually using that amount.
How much of a role do you think this has to do with just like addressing racial issues, maybe even with the next generation in this area?
This is definitely an environmental justice issue, meaning that, they target, this area has been targeted because it's an Indian reservation. It's the largest watershed in Wyoming, and Shoshone and Arapaho tribes aren't farmers and ranchers. We could grow as much crop on this carpet as they are there, because of the amount of pesticides and herbicides that they're using. Because it's sandstone soils. It's not even a feasible place for agriculture.
So what's it like for you to go home now that you're working on your graduate? What's the response to your research? I mean, you talked to.
It's positive. I'm working on behalf of the Shoshone tribe to reintroduce buffalo to this 900,000 acre area up here in the Owl Creek Mountains, and we're fighting non-Indians over brucellosis on that one. So
it's not your community. It's
yeah. I mean, I've got a lot of support with the grassroots Shoshone and Arapaho people. It's the farmers and ranchers that provide the biggest battle.
We thought about the tribe reaching out to the United Nations instead of trying to work through the U.S. System. Just reaching out to the heirs of the ranchers, trying to let them, or again, kind of like the Indian education problem, going after the kids, next generation. We talked about a different way of diverting the water instead of having this big dam that diverts it all away. Maybe try to find a way that the ranchers can pull water straight from the river, so there would be an in-stream flow and access. We talked about the issue of sovereignty and how the tribe's sovereignty is not really recognized, and how the one guy in the film talked about the state's going to fight for their sovereignty, the tribe's going to fight for theirs, but there's really not a solid definition of what the tribe's sovereignty is, or at least not a recognized definition. Perhaps the ranch should go with a different crop that doesn't require as much water, but can still make them a profit. Talked about cattle ranching being kind of a thing of the past. And then we also talked about possibly incentivizing the ranchers not to pull all the water out of it, especially if they don't need it. And last point was talking to the native ranchers and seeing maybe if they have a different take and what they're doing, if anything that could be different than the non-native ranchers.